Heidi Otway, your host for this Conversation on Cannabis virtual forum brought to you by the Medical Marijuana Education and Research Initiative at Florida A&M University. In this conversation, we're talking with Tahir Johnson about his efforts to create social equity and justice in the U.S. cannabis industry. To everyone who's joining us on this live forum, please share, post, and tag a friend on Facebook to have them join this conversation. If you're watching on YouTube, share the link so others can join us as well. During the forum, we want you to send us your questions in the comment box, and we'll do our best to have our guests answer them for you. We also want you to tell us what you think about this forum by completing the survey that will be posted in the comments on YouTube and Facebook after this live program. Your name will be entered into a drawing on May 12th, 2022 to win a $100 gift card provided by one of Mary's partners. Tahir, welcome to the forum. We're so excited to have you as a guest today.
Heidi, hello. How are you? Such an honor and a pleasure to be here with the FAMU Mary Network as a proud HBCU alum, HU Howard University. I'm happy to be here on this platform.
Wonderful. So tell us about the U.S. Cannabis Council and your role as a director of social equity for this national organization.
Absolutely. So the U.S. Cannabis Council is a broad coalition of cannabis businesses, organization, and people working towards the end of federal cannabis legalization. My role there is the director of social equity and inclusion. So I'm focused on advancing social equity and diversity through a number of different policy and programs, working together with our government relations teams on the different federal legalization bills that have come out, then also working together with our member companies to develop initiatives to help further diversity, equity, and inclusion internally and advance the industry, which is so important in cannabis because especially what is done to Black and brown communities. So I'm really focused on trying to advance efforts around that.
Okay, right. That's wonderful. You're also involved in the Marijuana Policy Project that was launched more than 20 years ago. Tell us a little bit about this organization. And it recently released a report this year about incarceration rates for cannabis possession. Tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So the Marijuana Policy Project is the largest cannabis organization working on the reform of cannabis laws in the country. As you said, it's been around 26 years. They've been responsible for running cannabis legalization campaigns in more states than anybody else, doing that through ballot initiatives and legalization campaigns. So it's an honor to work at Marijuana Policy Project. We just got Toy Hutchinson as our new president and CEO. The former, she ran the cannabis program in Illinois and was a state legislator. So, and as you said, that report is so important because we were highlighting there's still 19 states in the country where just for the scent of cannabis, you can even be arrested. So just highlighting all those places in the country where cannabis is, where cannabis can still land somebody in jail, and the hypocrisy around that, now that we have an industry that's done $26 billion in sales, yet there's still over 40,000 people arrested for cannabis is something that is super important to draw that attention to. So at Marijuana Policy Project, we're doing that work to try to legalize cannabis, right? Because nobody should be in prison for cannabis. And right now we're actually at the 50th anniversary of the Schaefer Commission, which was a report that was issued by Richard Nixon. And the goal of it was that he thought that it would find that cannabis had no medicinal value. But through that report, they actually found that smoking cannabis cannabis should be legalized. And still, again, here we are 50 years from that, and still having cannabis be federally illegal and illegal in a number of states. And so I get the honor of working on that on two different ends at both U.S. Cannabis Council and Marijuana Policy Project to move that issue forward. And all the while, with legalization, making sure that there's opportunities for, not just that it's legalized, but Black and brown people who've been the most harmed by the war on drugs have an opportunity to participate in the industry.
Yeah. So to everyone who's watching and listening, we're going to post in the comments on our social media channels the link to that report as well as to the U.S. Cannabis Council so you all can learn more about those organizations. So Tahir, what prompted you to start advocating for social equity and inclusion and justice in the cannabis industry?
Absolutely. Well, that's an amazing question. I actually was previously working in finance before. I was in wealth management. And as I read and was learning about the industry, my dad had fibromyalgia. And so he was taking all different types of medications around cannabis. And I said, Dad, I think medical cannabis can help you. And he says, son, I've been around this stuff since the 60s. It's not going to help me. So in order to help educate him on medical cannabis, he and I ended up getting our medical cards together. And as I started learning about the industry, and I found that there was a lack of, opportunities and ownership for minorities, women, people of color, it got me really interested in the industry and wondering how I could use my background in finance and understanding economics to try to help make a change in that. Yeah. And when I read about Hope Wiseman, my good friend, who was the youngest Black woman to own a dispensary in the country, and saw that she had a background in finance as well, I looked for ways to try to apply myself into the industry. And I found one of the ways when I initially started out, one of the things I was thinking of was entrepreneurship. But I also knew that, again, having gone to a historically Black college, I knew that the networks that I saw us to be able to succeed in corporate America and other areas, if we could replicate that and build like true diversity programs that it can help have an impact on the industry. So I had the opportunity to start working in advocacy back in 2019 with the National Cannabis Industry Association. And I've been focused on policy ever since, because again, the economics and business side is one side that's important. But as with anything, if you can't change the policy and change the laws to help create opportunities for us, it's not going to get done. And so having had the opportunity to focus on cannabis and, building diversity and inclusion in a number of different ways since then has been, what I've done. I've applied for licenses. I'll leave some of this stuff for the other questions I'm sure you had.
Okay, well, actually, I was going to ask you, what did you learn the most? What was the most surprising thing to you when you actually started learning more about the state of cannabis in America?
Absolutely. Well, I'll say one of the surprising things that I found was, access to capital is one of the hugest problems and biggest things that impact us being able to get into this industry, right? It could cost you, if you want to open up a dispensary license all in to open it, it might cost you $1 million. Wow. People from our communities don't have that. And furthermore, cannabis being federally illegal means that there's no access to banking. And that was one of the things where I thought I might have a unique opportunity in the industry, because there's no access to banking. That means that the only way that you can get access to capital is if you have personal wealth, access to private equity or venture capital. And we know from even outside of cannabis, just looking at traditional industries, that our people typically have less access to that, have less personal wealth. So being able to start a business that's compliance and capital intensive is something that is, a huge barrier, whether we're talking about real estate, whether we're talking about hiring the professionals that it costs to do it. I actually just personally applied for a dispensary license in my hometown of Trenton, New Jersey. And over the past year, I had to work with all different types of attorneys, all different types of people with expertise, and it took money to pay for that. So, it came from my own personal saving, the 401k plan, all those types of things. So again, this being able to create these pathways, create programs where people can have access to capital, where we remove those financial barriers that are typically the things that keep our out, is what I'm really focused on doing. And because I have the opportunity to work with some of the largest companies, some of the most influential people and organizations, really get the opportunity to send that message at a lot of different levels.
So let's go to like the bigger picture, and thank you for that insight. I think it's really helpful. We actually got a lot of questions from people before the show asking about, how do you get the money for it? But let's talk about like the data and the insights that you've gotten in your role as far as the economic impact of the industry and how it relates to people of color. So let's talk about, what about ownership and businesses in this $1 billion U.S. cannabis industry? What are the statistics and the data there?
Yes. The cannabis industry, as I said, it did $26 billion in sales last year. Think about how huge that is. That's
with a B, 26
with a B.
With a B.
B. Yes. That's more than the NFL, if you put it in a proper context.
Yeah.
And so that industry is one that African Americans, we have less than 2% ownership of, in the entire industry across the country. So think about that.
Well, last year when we did a show, it was at 4%.
Yeah.
What happened?
Leafly, which is a great company that has access to cannabis data, education, and information. They just put out their Seeds of Change report at the end of last year. Or it might have been early this year.
Yeah.
The number their data found was 2%. And so, despite all this social equity work that's being done, there's a lot of consolidation in the industry. Largely, as you look on new markets, a lot of the new businesses coming on. Largely, now we do have some successes in states. I like to applaud my home state in New Jersey. They've been super diverse with the new applicants they've brought on. But even think about, I'm sure, the number of people that have sold businesses and new businesses that are growing. Again, there's a huge need to increase the diversity in the industry, and that's the reason it's such a large focus of these programs. But
Wow.
but I know the number I saw before was 4%.
Wow.
And seeing it go down to 2% was the last number I saw, which is shocking.
Okay. Well, that kind of helps, segue right into the next question, because we get a lot of questions at Mary here in Florida from people who want to know, how do I get into the industry? How do I start? How do I achieve this? And, Florida has some very clear rules about who can actually set up, who can grow, cultivate, and sell the product. So knowing that in Florida, and then I'm sure other states have their own rules and regulations, how can people of color get into the industry?
Yes. Well, let me tell you, one of the best ways to get into the industry, people often think about the plant touching opportunities, right? Like on the dispensary, a cultivation or manufacturing facility. But really, one of the greatest opportunities that I see for our people to get involved in the industry is through the ancillary services.
Mm-hmm.
If you're an accountant, right, you can do accounting for cannabis. An attorney, somebody that's a media professional like yourself, telling the stories of people in cannabis. There's so many different opportunities and ways to get in. And what I found, even through my own personal experience, right, when I started out, the cannabis company that I applied for licenses with back in 2019, I was the CFO because I had a financial background.
Mm-hmm.
So figuring out how to leverage their existing skills, what they do already in their regular life, is the best way. And then you have the experience, you have the context, you have the, you understand the industry from the perspective of what you're doing, and you can transition that.
Mm-hmm.
I always think of this story. I was in Missouri right after they legalized cannabis. When I was talking to this brother, and he was saying, I'm going to start a cannabis business. Asked him what he want to do. He says, I'm going to start a cultivation facility. We start talking about, do you grow stuff or anything like that? He's like, no, now I'm a CPA. What do you do? I specialize in forensic accounting. And I was like, there you go. That's your lane, man. Not to discourage anybody, because, growing and actually owning a plant touching business can be a generational wealth opportunity. But again, there can be the path of least resistance, and getting your way in might be through something else.
Wow. So let's talk about the jobs that are available. So that was about people who want to start their own company, break in, to kind of start their own firm, whatever that is. But what about the jobs in the cannabis industry? What does that look like? And how do people make that move into that area?
Yes, well, there's over 400,000 jobs right now in the cannabis industry, and they expect that to quickly be over 500,000.
Wow.
So when you look at the cannabis industry, these are good paying, full-time jobs that you can have. So I think as you look at job opportunities and growth, cannabis is the career of the future. And when you talk about jobs, that could be, entry-level jobs. Like I was a patient counselor or bud tender, as you would call it, as a dispensary. Think about that. That's a retail job, right? Somebody who has retail experience working in that type of thing can do something like that. But there's also executive positions in cannabis. And one of the things that I'm really keenly focused on is trying to increase opportunity there, because I believe that, we don't just want opportunity for our people at the bottom, but also at the top. Right. So how do we increase? Now it's focused on how do we increase corporate diversity, C-suite diversity, board diversity, because at this point we're talking about publicly traded companies, right? And so one of the things that I did last year, it started this year, and I'm sad to see them go. This is actually their last week. I started an internship program, partnered with the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation and their C-suite program. And man, we had 8 amazing young people, all Black interns at some of the largest cannabis companies in the country.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yes, and some of them have already gotten job offers. I got one young brother that started a consulting firm and got one of the companies as his first contract.
Wow.
So again, it's just amazing. Like just them having the opportunity and knowing about the industry made a big difference. Because I'll tell you, these are smart kids just graduated college, right? And they weren't thinking about cannabis. Honestly, I had one of them tell me, when I got selected for the cannabis company, I was a little discouraged because, I wanted to work on the Hill. But now that they found this new industry, it's a new job opportunity that they're all in. So it's just something that I think that the smart people should consider. I'm always trying to convince our best and brightest minds, especially our folks at HBCUs, that we embrace cannabis as an opportunity of the future. It's a job creator. It's an economic booster. And so, I think that it's just time that we think of it and recognize it.
Well, I'm going to tell all of our college students and young people who are listening and watching, please follow Tahir on LinkedIn. He posts all these opportunities all the time. And if you're interested in getting in the industry, he's definitely someone you're going to want to know. So Tahir, thanks for sharing that.
And just in regards to the internship program, we are planning to do another cohort in the fall or spring. You do have to be 21. So if you are, college senior or recent graduate, please apply for the internship program. That's through the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. So I, love to have you, man. We have to increase this and get more opportunities for our folks.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that information. So let's dive a little bit more into, just the history of marijuana in communities of color, right? There's the stigma. We still have the prohibition that's still permeating in Black and Hispanic communities. What are your thoughts and what are you seeing when it comes to the stigma of people actually talking about cannabis, talking about marijuana, using it? And now, the conversation we're having here about starting a career in the industry. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, the stigma still very much exists, and it exists in a number of ways, right? Initially, when cannabis was outlawed, it was very much intended that it was going to be associated with Blacks and Mexicans, the reefer madness that's been a part of this country for so long. But I definitely see that working on dismantling it little by little, and it is by making cannabis more mainstream. Today, I mean, when I worked in the dispensary, some of the people that were coming in there the most were the senior crowd, right? Yeah. And a lot of that even comes through medical cannabis. And as people learn the ways that cannabis can be a benefit for people rather than a tool for harm, I think that's going to help to make a change. But then backing up, like I said, one of the things that our community has been so impacted by cannabis, where again, if growing up, I know if you use cannabis, people might say consider you to not be a good person, right? Or that you might not be competent, or that you cannot be, good at what you do. So I'm always personally trying to break that stigma to let people know that you can consume cannabis and that you can be a productive citizen. The same way people think about alcohol, right? And cannabis certainly is more safe than alcohol. So there's no reason that it should be looked down on any more than somebody taking a drink, right? We go to happy hour at work, all these things. But again, just trying to normalize cannabis is something that's very important. And we're starting to see it happen, right? I think young people are very much on board with that. But if you look at statistics, I want to say the statistic I saw yesterday was like around 70-some% of Democrats and almost 60% of Republicans are in support of cannabis. So at this point, it's something across the board, that people are really, the perspective is starting to change, right? It's really shifting. My 72-year-old dad, like I said, is somebody who's somebody that I kind of use as a barometer, and my parents now, it blows my mind to see how proud they are of the work that I'm doing. Right. So it's really changing. The same thing my mom was cussing me out for when I was young.
Exactly. So you talked a little bit about, the politics of cannabis and, the percentages of both sides of the aisle and how they feel about use. Do you think that legalization at the federal level is going to happen?
We still have some work to do. Is it going to happen? Absolutely, yes. When is it going to happen? I wish my crystal ball was a bit better at that. But we've seen, again, the people overwhelmingly want it. I think we just have to get our politicians to catch up to where we are, and that comes through education. That's why, platforms like this are so important.
Right.
But again, we've seen a number of cannabis bills of different types, pass recently, right? We've seen safe banking pass through the House several times. We've seen the MORE Act pass through the House several times.
And what's the MORE Act again? Just remind everyone what the MORE
Sure.
Act is.
So the MORE Act is the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act.
Right.
And so that's a bill that would legalize cannabis at the federal level.
Okay.
Make sure decriminalize cannabis so that people don't have charges, and it focuses on equity and opportunity as well. The Safe Banking Act that I mentioned is a bill that, although cannabis is federally illegal, the Safe Banking Act would provide safe harbor to banks so that they could bank cannabis.
Right.
And what that would do is allow opportunities for banking, which also impacts minority communities, because as we talked about earlier, that lack of access to capital is one of those things that really impacts us. But just not having a bank account also, when you think about public safety, is a huge issue, right? There's been, I think Oakland's a great example. I just read there was a dispensary owner that was shot last week. My friend Tucky Blunt is always talking about, the owner of Blunt Some More out in Oakland is always talking about how dangerous it is. He said it was more dangerous selling in a dispensary than it was on the street, right?
Is that because they have a lot of cash in there?
Exactly, right. If you have doing an all cash business, imagine what that's like. It makes you a target. His store was robbed several times and targeted. And so again, you're putting people in an unsafe situation. So trying to make sure that banking gets passed is a super important bill.
Yeah.
Most recently, we had the Cannabis Administration Opportunity Act. That's with Senator Schumer, Senator Booker, and Senator Wyden. And it was expected. We thought it was going to be released last month, but it's going to be pushed back a little bit. So looking forward to that.
Yeah.
But we also even have had a Republican Congresswoman, Nancy Mace, introduce the State's Opportunity Act, right? And, now we're seeing this from both sides, where people are starting to realize that cannabis should be legalized. So again, I'm excited just the fact that we're having this discourse around it. So I believe that it's going to happen, but I don't know when the president's going to when he's going to sign it. But speaking of that, President Biden just yesterday just granted clemency to a number of nonviolent cannabis offenders. So again, we're starting to see things change. And first and foremost, nobody should be in jail for cannabis. But as we legalize it again, what I'm focused on is making sure that there are economic opportunities through the same thing. That was something that dismantled our communities.
Yeah. So that, we got a couple of questions from people who actually registered before the show and sent in some questions. And so Jimmy asked, what should real social equity look like for communities that were affected by the war on drugs?
Absolutely. So for one, I think one of the things, and that actually in your question, is social equity in the community means that money that is being made from cannabis goes back to those communities. Whether that's direct reinvestment, that's through programs, just again trying to harm those. It looks like the business owners reflect in that community. It looks like the people from that community who are the ones there who have been a part of that, right? That they get to own businesses in that community, and that they get to share in the wealth that's created with that. It also means low barriers to entry. I think one of the interesting things that I'm finding is that it's not even just having social equity programs, but if there are low barriers to entering and participating in the market, then just automatically that makes it so that more people can get in. And New Jersey, when I just applied for this license this year, it was very different than when I did in 2019. This time around to submit my application, it costs $200 to submit the dispensary application. Imagine that. Almost any person could do that, so it makes it that much more accessible. Last time around, you were required to have real estate. You had to have a contract on something. This time around, a conditional license, you didn't have to have real estate. Those two things alone make big differences. And then also one of the things, in my opinion, are caps on licenses. When there are license caps, there's a limited opportunities and less opportunities for the people to get in. So that artificial scarcity is going to eliminate more of us. So by removing those caps on licenses, then you have more opportunities for people to participate. And I think that those are just some of the foundations of what equitable cannabis, legislation looks like. There's a lot more, but like those are some of the main points for me that I think of off top.
Yeah. So Tahir, how many states as of today actually have where cannabis is legal? I think it's over 37 now, right? Or are we pushing
Yeah,
forward?
I mean that's I feel like something might have just come online recently, but I'm
I
going to say if I'm going to guess off the top of my head, 36 medical, or maybe 37, and 18 for adult use.
Wow.
So 18, maybe 19 for adult use. So it's like again, most of the people in this country live in a jurisdiction where cannabis is legal in some form or fashion, and that speaks to this. That speaks to why the stigma and the opinions on cannabis are starting to change.
Yeah, yeah. So I asked that question because we got a question from someone who also registered before the show and sent in a question. Summer wanted to know, and maybe you can answer this, which state represents the fewest challenges and the greatest potential for someone who wants to get in the cannabis industry?
Man, I just read this op-ed that my friend Christine De La Rose wrote about New Mexico,
New
and
Mexico.
like yes, New Mexico is one of the new states to just legalize cannabis, and it seems like super low barriers to entry to apply for a license there. It wasn't that expensive, and I looked at the application myself. It looked super simple. I was like, New Mexico, y'all better look out because I might be there. But I wonder, Oklahoma also has like a super open market where, if you have the application fees, again, there's no caps there. It's easier to get in. If you are in, for my East Coast folks, again, if you're in New Jersey, I would definitely recommend that you look into it if you want to get into the industry. It's a great market, even if you're not in New Jersey. From New Jersey, if you have some family or somebody there, that could be a good look. New York is about to do it big. They're about to have a social equity fund, giving opportunities to people. Michigan, Detroit, they have some great programs. But again, New York and New Jersey are going to be exciting. But yeah, that new one that just came on the map was New Mexico. I would seriously look into that if y'all were thinking about it.
Good. Well, thanks for sharing that. So you mentioned earlier that, when people come to talk to you about wanting to get in the industry, and I told you Mary gets a lot of questions from folks who want to get in the industry, and you got a CPA who all of a sudden wants to become a farmer, right? So here's a question that I have for you. What are some reputable resources or opportunities out there where people can learn more about the cannabis industry in general, just so they can have, aside from Mary, which does an amazing job with forums like this, their website, their communications all over the state of Florida that people actually read on the national level, what are resources like Mary and even within the industry itself that people can go and learn more about the cannabis from the professional side?
Absolutely. So first, I'm going to say you need to join and look into Minorities for Medical Marijuana. That's run by my homegirl, Roz McCarthy, who's right there in Florida. Man,
Yeah.
she has such an amazing national program. I believe 29 chapters around the country of Black folks that are advocating in cannabis, that are doing cannabis business, all types of educational programs, a supplier diversity program. That would be a great first step. I would also shout out my folks, the Minority Cannabis Business Association. I literally would not be here if it was not for MCBA. MCBA is advocating for minorities and people of color in cannabis all over the country. They also have great resources and access to educational materials. Got to shout out Oaksterdam University. Oaksterdam is the
Where's that?
yes, that's in Oakland, California. But now we're in the metaverse now, so it's virtual, it's online. And I actually am an alum of Oaksterdam University. It's the oldest cannabis college in the country. They teach classes like horticulture, business, policy. I would definitely look into Oaksterdam. My brother's Cleveland School of Cannabis. They have in the Harrington Institute. These brothers have an accredited actual cannabis program. They're out of Ohio, where you can go take college level courses like around cannabis, all different types of things. Man, there's Cannabis Training University. I went there online also. There's and man, my podcast. You should check out the Cannabis Diversity Report for sure, because what I do on the podcast is highlight different professionals, talking about their path that they took to get into the industry. So, like you said, talking to those accountants and them giving you their blueprint on how they did it. But then also even talking to dispensary owners, advocacy people, Because I believe when you get the perspective of somebody that looks like you, talks like you,
Yeah.
sounds like you, speaks the lingo, right? Like, accountants speak a certain language. So when they hear somebody else that they know has the credibility, and it helps to change the industry. A couple of weeks ago, I had the opportunity to do an amazing webinar for DC area law school students, right? And so again, just always trying to think of how we can break down these barriers. I would say professionally, if you were in cannabis, seek me out, and I'll definitely try to help personally any way I can.
Yeah, I remember when you and I were kind of preparing for the program, you kind of named off four things that people really just don't know about the cannabis industry. Number one being it's heavily regulated.
Oh yeah.
Heavily regulated. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because again, I think people just don't recognize that this is a whole nother ball game here.
Oh yeah. So when we talk about heavily regulated, we're talking about legal cannabis is typically tracked from seed to sale. So
Yeah.
that means from the second that seed goes into the ground all the way to when it's sort of the dispensary, other byproducts that are created with it, it's literally being tracked on that. Think about the security that goes into cannabis, right? Like the cameras, the way the floor plans are done, the way the buildings have to be built. You have to cement walls and make sure nobody tries the mission impossible and come into your place. All these are things where you have to log, just logging the materials, reporting. All those things are super critical. So cannabis industry, if you think about it, it really is a compliance industry.
Yeah.
Right. If you're talking about medical cannabis, you're talking about HIPAA and having to follow those rules. So it is very actually super complicated.
Yeah, and the other thing that I don't think people recognize is that every state has different rules.
Oh, every state has different rules, and so for example, and it is only within that state. So cannabis doesn't cross state lines. If you are again, if I have a New Jersey cannabis business, I can purchase cannabis from another licensed person in New Jersey. Like I have to. It's a state-contained program. Even if I have a business in New Jersey and I have one in Maryland, like those two can't. They don't do any business together.
Yeah.
The taxes in cannabis, right? That's another huge thing people don't think of. Cannabis businesses are subject to tax code 280E. A long time ago, somebody who was a drug dealer tried to write off things on his taxes. So they say that anybody who's selling a federally illegal drug does not get the write-off tax, does not get the write-off things on their taxes. So
Wow.
cannabis businesses end up paying 75 to 80 cents on the dollar in taxes, just with their businesses. So that in itself is complicated. There's so many different things to navigate. But I don't say that to discourage anyone, right? It can be done, but it's one where you have to do your research and the education to be able to come into it.
Yeah.
That was one of the things, even before I started in the industry, I probably spent like a year and a half just researching, learning, getting to know everything, and then taking some of those different courses. Again, knowledge is power and education, and this is no different. I would say, in my opinion, just being a consumer doesn't necessarily qualify you, right? You really want to learn the science of this.
Yeah.
There's cannabinoids, terpenes. When I say cannabinoids, that means like when people talk about CBD or THC. Those are just two of the hundreds of them that exist in the cannabis plant, right? So the more that you can be knowledgeable and know about those things can really help you to move ahead in the industry. So I would definitely challenge people to focus on the education and learn and use that as an opportunity to get into the industry.
Yeah. Tahir, do you do any kind of education or work to just kind of help people understand, that the what is it called? The legacy industry of cannabis, right? So the street level cannabis, the black market. I've heard so many different terms. Do you do any kind of education around just the illegal side of cannabis? Because it is still going on.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean,
Dime bags and all of it.
Well, the important thing that I always try to keep sight of when we talk about the legacy market is before all of this stuff that I'm talking about, right? This $26 billion legal industry existed. There were people here that were selling cannabis. There were people here that were taking care of their families with cannabis. There were people that were living their lives all through cannabis, right? And when we talk about legalization, in my opinion, we are displacing that, right? And so when I say that $26 billion number, the actual number of the cannabis is being sold is much greater. The legacy market is much greater and much larger than the legal cannabis market. So it's important that as we talk about these opportunities to legalize cannabis, it's not pointing the finger, it's not leaving those people behind. I actually believe that they should be the first people to have opportunities to be able to be in the industry. So everywhere I go, right, I'm always trying to educate people, tell them about it, tell them my story, right? Like, because, you know, I can't come from all the same stuff, but I've had the opportunity to work in corporate America, understand those things. And so I'm just trying to, you know, share that message and try to help people. Because again, I do believe that the industry should consist of people who've been paving the way for this plan forever.
Yeah, yeah. Tahir, are you doing any work in Florida?
Haven't done too much in Florida. I was just there last week in Miami for the Benzinga Cannabis Conference, but maybe my you folks will have me come down there.
Okay. And Tahir, you know, I wanted to ask a couple of more questions before we kind of wrap up. How would you like to influence the cannabis industry on behalf of people of color? You know, you're doing all these amazing things. You're with some very influential organizations that are working to, you know, change things. So what would you like to do to influence the cannabis industry for people of color?
Yeah, well, if you know, that's a good question, and that, you know, is one that I didn't prepare for or think, but you know, when you ask it, it makes me think of legacy. So if people thought about me and I look back, you know, years from now, hopefully after it's legalized, what I would hope my role in all this and the way I would be remembered would be just for, you know, opening doors, tearing down that stigma. With me, one of the things that I'm hyper focused on, especially in our Black communities with that stigma, is educating and bringing our people into the conversation.
Yeah.
I'm actually here right now at the African American Mayors Association conference. Last year, I was at the National Black Caucus of State Legislators. I've had the honor of having Reverend Sharpton allow me to put on a cannabis panel at the National Action Network. I'm here at FAMU talking to y'all, right? So just having these conversations and pushing the envelope of like what cannabis can be, that message of the economic opportunity that it can bring for our communities, that education, and allowing us to have a foot in this door. Again, turning something that's been such a source of pain for our communities. You know, African Americans 4 times more likely to be arrested for cannabis. I want to be able to turn that into a success story. So if I could be a part of helping to change that years from now, when we're talking about Black ownership, right? You know, for most of my career, even before cannabis, I've been focused on trying to increase Black wealth, Black financial literacy, and I see cannabis as a tool to do that. So I'm hoping that, again, this generational wealth that will be created through this industry, that will have an opportunity to be transferred to us, and it can be something to help empower our communities. You know, I grew up with my parents studying, I'll say, civil rights leaders and looking back at that time. And I really think of cannabis as one of the greatest civil rights issues, one of the greatest human rights issues, the greatest economic opportunity issues of our generation. And so I just want to try to help us get it right and help, you know, again, help cannabis change the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, to hear that was great. I think I want to ask you more questions, honestly, if that's okay. That was just so good what you just said, just so powerful. I could hear the passion in your voice, and I know a couple of years from now and be like, come on back. Let's talk about what you've accomplished, right?
Let's do it.
Let me ask you a question. This one came from also somebody who registered in advance, and it kind of ties into what you just talked about. And it was Devin who said, what practices and initiatives would you recommend for new cannabis cultivators and manufacturers in new markets to greatly impact social equity and social justice issues?
Yes. One of them, I think, is education. And if you're an operator, just being able to educate people on like how to get into business, like through whether it be an incubator program, some type of technical assistance program, tours, like somebody coming in and seeing what the operation looks like. I know you can't just let anybody in, but you know, I've seen certain groups maybe they may say they'll take 5 people and they'll do a program, you know, to educate them and maybe have
and
a
I
small.
think you've done that before, haven't you, Tahir? Were you taking some young people in?
Absolutely. So now at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, I have the 8 interns But also previously at my organization I was at before, the National Cannabis Industry Association, I started a social equity scholarship program where we took, at the time, it was about 150 social equity operators from around the country, and we provided them with technical assistance, allowed them to be able to get into the conferences, to be able to meet the other businesses, to be able to network with each other. So I certainly believe that education is something that anybody can do, right? No matter how small or large your business is, but you can give back. I know a number of businesses that donate a small portion of proceeds to the Last Prisoner Project or other organizations like that.
What's the Last Prisoner Project?
So Last Prisoner Project is an organization that's focused on getting people out of jail for cannabis. They work on different, specifically bringing people home. And that's to talk about a worthy cause, as we're talking about an entry that's made all this money. Hiring people that have had previous cannabis charges. If your state allows that in the regulations, is something huge that you can do. And in New Jersey, where I applied for a license, I partnered with the New Jersey Reentry Program and made a commitment to hire at least 10% of my employees from their population of people that had previous charges. And I know I talked a lot about my federal work a lot, but that really is something that I'm really excited about as I go into this next chapter. I just applied for a license, a dispensary license in my hometown, Ewing, New Jersey. Partnered with my good friend, my big sister, Wanda James. Shout out to her and Scott, the owners of Simply Pure, which is the first Black dispensary in the country in Colorado. So for me, even as I looked at building my business, I wanted to think about how could I partner with another African-American, a leader in this industry. How do I build my brand and also add value to hers? We can work together. Unity, whether we're talking about cannabis or anything else, cooperative economics. That is a principle that can change the game. So if I would leave y'all with anything, I would say to think about that. Think about cooperative economics, how we can strengthen our communities, working together. And this cannabis plan can be a tool and be part of all of that.
Wow, Tahir, that was so awesome. I'm going to have to remember that. All right.
Sure.
So, Tahir, thank you so much for being a guest on this Conversations on Cannabis virtual forum, brought to you by the Medical Marijuana Research and Education Initiative at Florida A&M University. Thank you to everyone who's watching and listening to this program. Tell us what you think about this forum by completing the survey that will be posted in the comment boxes on YouTube and Facebook after this live program. If you complete the survey, your name will be entered into a drawing on May 12th, 2022 to win a $100 gift card provided by one of Mary's partners. We also want you to encourage you to go to the Florida Department of Health, Office of Medical Marijuana Use website to learn how to obtain a legal medical marijuana card in the state of Florida. And we also encourage you to go to the Florida A&M University's Mary website to learn more about this initiative, its educational programs, and additional information about cannabis use in Florida. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day. Thank you, Tahir.
All right. Thanks for having me.